Chapter 1. A Clash of Kings. The Grand Hall of the Council of Drazzle was drenched in tension as leaders from the vampire aristocracy and werewolf tribes convened for the first time in decades. At the head of the vampire delegation stood Damien Falker, a cold and calculating alpha with piercing crimson eyes that demanded obedience. Across the room, Arden, the fiery new leader of the werewolves, stared him down, his golden eyes glowing with barely concealed rage. The air between them crackled with animosity as their respective factions watched in silence, awaiting the inevitable explosion. Their fragile peace was already hanging by a thread. "This so-called alliance is nothing but a leash around the neck of my people," Arden growled, his deep voice echoing through the hall. "Your kind has always thrived on control, Damien, but I won't be your puppet." His words were laced with venom, his claws extending slightly as a warning. Damien remained calm, his lips curling into a mocking smirk. "Control? It's called civilization, Wolf," Damien replied icily, his voice a quiet menace. "Your people wouldn't last a month without our influence. The only thing you've mastered is savagery." The insult hit its mark, and Arden surged forward, his body trembling with barely restrained fury. "Say that again," he snarled, his voice dangerously low. The werewolf guards behind him tensed, ready to spring into action, while the vampires remained eerily still, confident in their leader's command. Damien took a deliberate step forward, closing the distance between them. "I don't need to repeat myself to someone so beneath me," he said, his fangs glinting in the dim light. The tension erupted as Arden lunged at Damien, their claws and strength colliding in a clash that sent shockwaves through the hall. The council descended into chaos as their respective factions tried to pull them apart, but the damage was done. Arden's rage burned hotter than ever, his chest heaving as he was dragged back by his beta. Damien wiped a trickle of blood from his lip, his smirk never faltering. "You're predictable," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "This is why your kind will never truly lead." Arden's growl rumbled through the room, but he held himself back, his mind racing with plans for vengeance. As they were forced to retreat to their quarters, both alphas were left seething, unaware that the bond tying them together had already begun to take root. Chapter 2. A Bond Unseen. Damien paced in his chambers, the earlier confrontation replaying in his mind like an annoying itch he couldn't scratch. He was no stranger to conflict, but Arden's raw fury unsettled him in a way he couldn't quite place. His body still hummed with the strange energy he'd felt when their claws collided, a sensation that left him both intrigued and angry. "He's nothing," Damien muttered to himself, staring out the window at the glowing lights of Noctara. Yet, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the image of Arden's defiant golden eyes. Meanwhile, Arden sat brooding by a roaring fire in his quarters within the moonlit forests. His beta, Taryn, was lecturing him about maintaining control, but Arden barely heard a word. His thoughts were consumed by Damien, his arrogance, his sharp tongue, and the strange pull Arden had felt during their fight. It was unlike anything he'd experienced before, a force that seemed to burrow under his skin. "This doesn't make sense," Arden muttered, running a hand through his dark hair. "It's like he's in my head." The days that followed only heightened their confusion. They kept their distance, but fate had other plans. During a full moon, both alphas felt a surge of power that left them gasping for air, their senses overwhelmed. Damien clutched his chest, his fangs aching as if in response to some primal call. Arden staggered into the forest, his wolf howling in his mind. Neither could deny it any longer. There was something connecting them, something unnatural and dangerous. But they were alphas, and alphas did not yield, not even to fate. Damien decided to consult his advisor, Celine, who confirmed his worst fear. A bond was forming between him and Arden, a bond that was meant to be impossible between two alphas. "It's a curse," Damien said, his voice filled with quiet rage. "I won't let it control me." Across the kingdom, Arden reached a similar conclusion. "Whatever this is," he told Taryn, his tone firm, "I'll fight it. No vampire will ever own me." But even as they swore to resist, their dreams began to betray them, pulling them closer in ways neither could escape. Chapter 3. The Night of Blood. Tensions between vampires and werewolves came to a boiling point when a rogue faction of wolves attacked a vampire convoy near the borders of the moonlit forests. Damien was quick to assume Arden's involvement, viewing the attack as an act of war. So much for alliances, Damien sneered as he summoned his forces, his crimson eyes blazing with fury. Despite Celine's pleas for caution, Damien was adamant about retaliating swiftly. If the werewolves want blood, we'll drown them in it. Arden, on the other hand, was blindsided by the news of the attack. What convoy? He growled, pacing in his den while Taryn briefed him. Though the attack had been carried out by rogue wolves, Damien wouldn't care about the distinction, and Arden knew it. His hands clenched into fists, his mind torn between preventing war and standing his ground against the arrogant vampire. If he thinks he can march into my territory, he's mistaken, Arden snarled, his golden eyes burning with determination. The two alphas confronted each other at the site of the massacre, surrounded by their forces. Damien accused Arden of orchestrating the ambush, while Arden vehemently denied any involvement. Your arrogance blinds you, Damien, Arden snapped, his voice echoing through the clearing. Not all wolves follow me, just as not all vampires follow you. But Damien was unrelenting, his distrust of Arden fueling his rage. The tension between them ignited into another brutal clash, their power shaking the very ground beneath them. By the end of the skirmish, both leaders were forced to retreat, their bodies battered but their pride intact. The encounter only deepened their hatred for one another, but the bond between them pulsed stronger than ever. That night, as they licked their wounds in solitude, neither could deny the strange ache in their chests. It wasn't just anger, it was something far more dangerous. And it terrified them both. Chapter 4. Fractures of the Heart. In the days following their clash, Damien's mood grew darker. He spent hours poring over maps and strategies, determined to maintain the upper hand against Arden. Yet, despite his focus on war, his thoughts often drifted to the fiery Alpha. He hated how Arden had stood his ground, how his golden eyes had burned with defiance. And more than anything, he hated the pull he felt toward him. This isn't real, Damien muttered to himself, gripping the edges of his desk. It's a trick, a curse. Meanwhile, Arden struggled with his own turmoil. He spent his nights roaming the forest, unable to sleep as visions of Damien haunted his mind. Taryn noticed his alpha's unrest and finally confronted him. You're not yourself, Arden, Taryn said, his tone filled with concern. Whatever happened between you and Damien, it's affecting you. Arden scoffed, brushing off his beta's words, but deep down, he knew Taryn was right. The bond was consuming him, and he didn't know how much longer he could resist it. When their paths crossed again during a meeting of their advisors, the tension between them was palpable. Neither dared to speak of the bond, but it lingered in every glance, every word exchanged. Arden felt his resolve weakening as Damien's crimson eyes bore into him, while Damien was equally tormented by the pull he couldn't escape. Their unspoken connection was a double-edged sword, cutting into their pride and leaving them raw and vulnerable. By the end of the meeting, both alphas were left shaken. Damien retreated to his chambers, vowing to sever the bond no matter the cost. Arden, on the other hand, found himself standing under the moonlight, his thoughts consumed by the vampire alpha he swore to hate. The bond was changing them in ways they couldn't understand, and neither was prepared for what lay ahead. Chapter 5. Words Like Blades. Damien summoned Arden to a neutral meeting ground, determined to negotiate, or at least attempt to. The moon hung low as the two alphas faced each other across a stone table in the heart of the whispering glade. You've caused me nothing but trouble since this alliance was proposed, Damien began, his voice cold and clipped. If you can't control your wolves, then perhaps your position as alpha is undeserved. Arden's lip curled into a snarl, his golden eyes flashing dangerously. Watch your tongue, vampire, he growled. I'm not one of your spineless minions who bows at the snap of your fingers. I won't tolerate your insults. His claws scraped against the table as he leaned forward, the air between them charged with tension. Despite the hostility, Damien couldn't help but notice the raw power radiating from the wolf, power that both infuriated and fascinated him. You don't have the luxury of tolerance, Arden, Damien shot back. Your people's survival depends on me keeping my kind in check. Or have you forgotten what happened the last time you wolves tried to stand alone? His words were like daggers, cutting into Arden's pride. The werewolf alpha slammed his fists on the table, the sound echoing through the glade. You think you're so superior, don't you? Arden spat. You wouldn't last a day without your precious fangs. My people fight with honor, not manipulation. The meeting ended with neither side willing to back down. As they stormed away from each other, both alphas found themselves replaying the argument in their minds, their anger mingling with a strange sense of longing. Damien clenched his jaw, silently cursing the bond that seemed to tighten its grip on him with every interaction. Arden, on the other hand, stared up at the moon, his heart pounding as he whispered, "Why him?" Chapter 6. The Edge of Truth. Days later, Celine approached Damien with a warning. "The bond between you and Arden is growing stronger," she said, her voice heavy with concern. "If you don't address it, it will consume you both." Damien scoffed, his crimson eyes narrowing. "Address it? You want me to accept this curse? I'd rather die." But even as he spoke, he couldn't ignore the pang of doubt that lingered in his chest. Arden was facing a similar dilemma. Taryn cornered him in the training grounds, his expression stern. "You're distracted, Arden," Taryn said bluntly. "This thing with Damien, it's affecting you, and it's affecting the pack." Arden snarled in response, his claws flexing. "You think I don't know that? You think I want this?" His voice cracked, and for a moment, the fiery alpha seemed vulnerable. "I didn't choose this bond, Taryn. It's a curse, and I'll break it if it kills me." Their next encounter came sooner than expected. A rogue vampire had been captured trespassing in werewolf territory, and Arden personally escorted the prisoner to Noctara. When Damien arrived to receive the rogue, their eyes met, and the world seemed to fall away. "You didn't have to come in person," Damien said, his voice softer than usual. "I wanted to make sure this was handled properly," Arden replied, his tone guarded but lacking its usual venom. For a moment, the tension between them eased, and they found themselves standing closer than they realized. "This bond," Damien began, his voice barely above a whisper, "it's dangerous." Arden nodded, his golden eyes searching Damien's. "I know," he said quietly. "But fighting it doesn't seem to be working, does it?" The vulnerability in their voices was fleeting, and they quickly retreated into their usual defenses. But the seed of understanding had been planted, and neither could ignore it. Chapter 7. A Rift in the Pack. Damien had never been one to trust easily, but something about Arden's presence unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. That night, his thoughts wandered back to their argument at the Whispering Glade. Despite the venomous words, there was a pull between them, an undeniable connection. He gritted his teeth. "I won't give in," he muttered to himself, but the harsh reality was, he was already feeling too much. Meanwhile, Arden was confronting his own demons. In the quiet of his private chambers, he questioned his every decision. "What am I doing?" he whispered to the night, his claws running through his tangled hair. His heart raced with confusion, torn between duty to his pack and an inexplicable desire for the vampire who had been nothing but a threat. He slammed his fist into the stone wall. Why him? Celine was growing more concerned by the day, sensing the growing instability between the two alphas. She warned Damien, "You can't keep fighting the bond. It'll destroy you both if you do." But Damien, ever defiant, refused to listen. "I'm not a slave to my instincts," he retorted sharply, though deep down, he knew the battle was already lost. In the days that followed, Arden's pack began to feel the strain of his distraction. Taryn, ever loyal, tried to keep the wolves in line, but the tension was palpable. "Something's different," Taryn said, his eyes narrowing as he watched Arden. "You're not the same. You're too focused on Damien." Arden's heart tightened, but he remained silent. The more he tried to distance himself, the harder it became to deny the connection. Chapter 8. The Dance of Flames. The rift between the two leaders deepened as the next confrontation loomed. Arden had been forced to confront a group of his own wolves who had disrespected the truce between the vampires and werewolves. The tension was thick in the air as Arden barked at them, his golden eyes fierce. "You think you can defy me?" he roared. "No one insults our agreement with Damien and gets away with it." His pack stood frozen, knowing the consequences of angering their alpha. Damien, meanwhile, had his own issues to deal with. A vampire faction had attempted to overtake one of Arden's border territories, testing his control over his lands. Damien's anger was palpable as he confronted the culprits. "I won't tolerate any more of this," he growled, his voice dripping with venom. His vampire guards stood at attention, but inside, Damien was conflicted, his thoughts drifting back to Arden. The two met under the cover of darkness, their eyes locking in a shared moment of fury and unspoken desire. "You think I'm weak?" Arden's voice was a low growl, his fists clenched. "Your people are testing my patience, Damien. I won't let you walk all over me." Damien stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "If you weren't so stubborn, this could have been resolved long ago." The conversation grew heated as the sparks flew between them. Their words were sharp, but there was an unspoken understanding beneath the surface. "I don't want this," Arden admitted quietly, his voice a mixture of frustration and longing. Damien's heart skipped a beat, his breath catching in his throat. "Neither do I," he replied, before turning away, unwilling to admit how much the Alpha's confession had shaken him. Chapter 9. In the heat of the moment. The tension between the two Alphas finally erupted in a fierce battle. Both were intent on proving their dominance, their hatred fueling the violence between them. Their claws and fangs collided with brutal force, the forest shaking with the intensity of their fight. The night air was thick with their fury, neither willing to yield. As Damien's fist connected with Arden's jaw, the vampire Alpha felt a strange wave of satisfaction. But it was short-lived. Arden's retaliatory strike landed with equal force, and Damien stumbled back. His red eyes glowed as he regained his footing, meeting Arden's determined gaze. "You're a fool, Damien," Arden sneered, blood dripping from his lip. "You're not stronger than me." "You're not stronger than me either," Damien retorted, his voice colder than the night air. His muscles burned from the impact, but the fight was far from over. They clashed again, the power of their strikes sending shockwaves through the trees. For a moment, it seemed as though neither would be able to stand the other's intensity. Then, as they paused to catch their breath, the tension shifted. Neither spoke, but the silence between them was thick with something neither wanted to acknowledge. They were both exhausted, their bodies covered in bruises and blood, but the battle had left them yearning for something more. The connection between them burned brighter than their rage, and neither could ignore it any longer. Chapter 10. A Glimpse of Weakness. After their brutal encounter, both Alphas retreated to their respective homes, nursing their wounds. Damien's heart raced as he tried to focus on anything other than the images of Arden's face, his body, and that damnable pull that seemed to grow stronger every day. "I won't give in," Damien muttered through clenched teeth, though his mind told him otherwise. Meanwhile, Arden couldn't escape the memory of Damien's eyes, the way they held a mixture of fury and something else, something darker. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing his quarters. "I can't keep doing this," he whispered to himself. "I can't keep denying what's happening between us." But his pride was still too strong, too ingrained to let go of the idea of winning this battle. The following day, a messenger arrived from Damien's territory, bringing with him an urgent request for Arden. "Damien demands your presence at the castle," the messenger said curtly. Arden's heart raced. He didn't know if this was a trap or a chance to settle things once and for all. Regardless, he couldn't ignore the invitation. When Arden arrived at the castle, Damien was waiting for him, his eyes sharp but weary. "I know this is a mistake," Damien began, his voice low. "But we need to talk." Arden crossed his arms, his posture defensive. "You're not my enemy, Damien. But I can't keep pretending this bond doesn't exist." Damien's gaze softened for the briefest moment. "Neither can I." Chapter 11. A Shattered Truce. Damien and Arden sat across from each other, the weight of their conversation heavier than ever. "We can't keep this up," Damien said, his voice almost pleading. "This constant fighting, the anger. It's tearing us apart." Arden leaned forward, his golden eyes locked on Damien's. "What do you propose?" he asked. "I don't know," Damien admitted, running a hand through his dark hair. "But I do know we can't keep pretending this bond isn't real." The words hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. Arden stood abruptly, his claws scraping the floor as he paced. "This is a mistake," he muttered, though his body language betrayed him. "What's the real reason you're fighting this?" Damien pressed, his voice quieter now. "You're afraid of what this means for your pack, aren't you?" Arden froze. "I'm not afraid of anything," he snapped. "I just won't let this destroy everything I've worked for." Damien's expression softened, but only for a moment. "You're not alone in this, Arden. We're in this together, whether we like it or not." The silence that followed was thick with uncertainty, but for the first time, both alphas saw the possibility of something more between them, something neither was ready to admit, but both felt growing. Chapter 17. The Edge of Betrayal. The tensions escalated as Kale began spreading false rumors to stir unrest between the vampire and wolf territories. Villagers whispered of betrayal, and distrust grew on both sides. Arden confronted Damien in the Hollow Grove one evening, his golden eyes blazing with anger. "You promised me honesty, Damien. How do I know you're not part of this?" Damien was visibly hurt by Arden's accusation but maintained his composure. "Do you think so little of me?" he asked, stepping closer. "I've risked my standing among my own people to protect this alliance. If you don't trust me by now, then what's the point of any of this?" His words cut deep, and Arden faltered, guilt flickering across his face. "I don't want to doubt you," Arden admitted, his voice softer now. "But Kale is relentless, and I can't afford to let my guard down." Damien's crimson gaze softened, and he placed a hand on Arden's shoulder. "Then let me help you, Arden. Together, we can stop him before he tears everything apart." Their conversation ended on a tentative truce, but the damage had already been done. Arden returned to his pack that night, his heart heavy with uncertainty. Meanwhile, Damien retreated to his castle, determined to prove his loyalty in a way that would leave no room for doubt. Chapter 18. A Dangerous Pact. Kale wasn't working alone. Arden discovered that the rogue had allied with a powerful coven of witches who sought to exploit the growing tension for their own gain. Their leader, a cunning sorceress named Morgana, had a personal vendetta against Damien and saw Kale as the perfect pawn. When Arden shared this revelation with Damien, the vampire alpha's expression darkened. "Morgana," he muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. "She's been waiting for an opportunity like this." Arden frowned, his frustration mounting. "Then we need to strike first. If we let them move unchecked, everything we've built will crumble." Damien agreed, but their plan required careful coordination. They decided to infiltrate Morgana's lair together, despite the risks. "This is madness," Taryn warned Arden. "You're putting your trust in a vampire who could turn on you at any moment." But Arden silenced him with a sharp glare. "Damien has proven himself. I won't hear another word against him." The journey to Morgana's lair was fraught with danger, but it also brought Arden and Damien closer. As they navigated treacherous terrain and fended off attacks from Morgana's minions, they began to rely on each other in ways neither had anticipated. The bond between them grew stronger, even as the stakes continued to rise. Chapter 19. Shadows and Secrets. Morgana's lair was a labyrinth of darkness, filled with traps and illusions designed to confuse and disorient intruders. Arden and Damien moved cautiously, their senses on high alert. "Stay close," Damien whispered, his crimson eyes scanning the shadows. "I won't let anything happen to you." Arden scoffed but couldn't hide the flicker of appreciation in his gaze. "I can take care of myself," he replied, though he didn't pull away when Damien placed a protective hand on his back. The tension between them was palpable, but there was no time to dwell on it as they pressed forward. They eventually reached Morgana's inner sanctum, where the sorceress awaited them with a sly smile. "How touching," she sneered, her voice dripping with mockery. "Two alphas, bound by a bond neither of you fully understands. It's almost poetic." Morgana's taunts hit their mark, but Arden and Damien refused to rise to her bait. Instead, they focused on the task at hand, destroying the artifact that gave her control over Kale and the witches. The battle that followed was fierce and chaotic, pushing both alphas to their limits as they fought to protect not only their territories but also each other. Chapter 20. A Moment of Weakness. In the aftermath of the battle, Arden and Damien found themselves alone in the ruins of Morgana's lair. Both were bruised and bloodied, but they had succeeded in their mission. Cale's control had been broken, and Morgana's power was no more. As they sat by a dying fire, their exhaustion gave way to raw emotion. "You could have left me back there," Arden said quietly, his golden eyes meeting Damien's. "Why didn't you?" Damien hesitated before answering, his voice soft but firm. "Because I couldn't bear to lose you." The vulnerability in Damien's words was a revelation for Arden, and for the first time, he allowed himself to fully acknowledge the bond between them. Without thinking, he leaned in, their lips meeting in a kiss that was both tender and intense. It was a moment of surrender, a confirmation of everything they had tried to deny. But as the night wore on, doubts crept back into Arden's mind. Could they really make this work, or were they doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past? The uncertainty lingered, even as the bond between them grew stronger than ever. Chapter 21. The Return of Cale. Cale wasn't defeated so easily. Though Morgana's control over him had been broken, his thirst for vengeance remained. He regrouped with the remnants of his followers, determined to destroy Arden and Damien once and for all. When word of Cale's return reached Arden, he knew they couldn't afford to let their guard down. "We need to finish this," he told Damien, his voice filled with determination. "Cale won't stop until one of us is dead." Damien nodded, his crimson eyes flashing with resolve. "Then we end it together." Their final confrontation with Cale was a battle unlike any other. The rogue wolf was fueled by rage and desperation, his attacks relentless. But Arden and Damien fought as one, their bond giving them a strength neither had ever known. In the end, it was Damien who dealt the final blow, driving his blade through Cale's heart. As the rogue fell, a sense of relief washed over both alphas. The threat had been eliminated, but the scars of their journey would remain. Chapter 22. The Bitter Aftermath. The death of Cale brought no peace, only a bitter silence that hung between Arden and Damien. They returned to their respective territories, their hearts heavy with the weight of the battle. Arden's pack mourned their losses, while Damien's people cautiously celebrated the vampire alpha's victory. Yet, neither felt the sense of triumph they expected. "I never wanted to be a king," Arden confessed one night, staring out over the ruined battlefield. "I just wanted to protect what's mine. And now everything feels empty." Damien stood beside him, the firelight flickering in his eyes. "Sometimes, being a king isn't about glory. It's about the choices we make when we have nothing left to lose." Arden turned to him, his gaze softening. "Then what now?" he asked, uncertainty clouding his voice. Damien took a deep breath, the weight of his own choices pressing down on him. "Now, we rebuild. Together." The sincerity in Damien's words cut through Arden's doubts, and for the first time in weeks, a flicker of hope ignited within him. Their paths had diverged so many times, yet now they stood on the same ground, willing to face whatever came next. The war was over, but the real battle, finding peace within themselves, was only just beginning. Chapter 23. A Moment of Reconciliation. The days after the battle passed in a blur of rebuilding and recovery. Arden and Damien spent more time together, slowly finding their rhythm. Though there were still scars, both physical and emotional, they no longer allowed their past fears to define them. One evening, as they stood overlooking the ruins of the battleground where so many lives had been lost, Arden spoke softly, almost as though to himself. "I don't know if I can be what my people need, what you need." Damien turned to him, his gaze unwavering. "You've already been everything they need, Arden. And you've been everything I need too." His words caught Arden off guard, leaving him momentarily speechless. "I don't deserve you," Arden whispered, his throat tight. Damien's hand found his, the warmth of his touch grounding him. "No one is perfect. But we're better together. Let me prove it to you." It was a simple promise, but in that moment, it felt like the world had shifted. They were no longer two alphas at war, but partners bound by something stronger than duty, a love that defied everything they once believed possible. Chapter 24. The Future Awaits. As time passed, Arden and Damien's bond only grew deeper. They navigated the challenges of leadership together, finding a balance between their roles as alphas and their desire for a future free of conflict. Arden, once hesitant to embrace his place as a leader, began to see the value in his position. Damien, too, found himself more committed to protecting Arden, not just as a partner but as a king in his own right. "I never thought this would work," Arden admitted one evening as they sat in Damien's chambers, looking out at the horizon. "We've been through too much for this to be easy." Damien smiled, his gaze soft. "Love is never easy, Arden. But that's what makes it worth fighting for." The world was still fractured, the echoes of past battles lingering, but Arden and Damien had found a fragile peace, a peace that they would defend together. Chapter 25. The Final Battle. It seemed the calm was too good to last. A new threat arose, one that neither Arden nor Damien had anticipated. An alliance of rogue vampires and werewolves, disillusioned by the leadership of Arden and Damien, sought to overthrow them. The final battle was inevitable, but this time Arden and Damien were united in a way they had never been before. "This is it," Arden said, his voice steady as he surveyed the battlefield. "No more running. No more hesitation." Damien stood beside him, his crimson eyes cold with determination. "We fight for the future. For each other." Together, they led their forces, fighting with everything they had. It was a brutal battle, one that tested every ounce of their strength and will. But in the end, the rogue alliance was defeated, their forces scattered. Arden and Damien stood victorious once more. But this time, there was no empty feeling in their hearts. They had fought for something worth fighting for, not power, not dominance, but a future where they could live together, as equals, bound by love. As the dust settled and the sun began to rise over the battlefield, Damien took Arden's hand, his voice low and sincere. "We've done it. Together." Arden smiled, his golden eyes bright with hope. "Together, always."